World, welcome and happy Friday. I am Allie with The Right Place, Right Time, my virtual boutique of professional book coaching and ghostwriting services. I'm really excited to be here this afternoon with client and forthcoming author Sam. We are talking about how stories serve us, and today in particular, how stories can serve us in healing and recovery from trauma. If you have been following my channels this month, you know that April is really important to me, not only because of the different causes that I care about, as sexual assault awareness and child abuse prevention are big topics in the month of April, but also because I've dedicated April to talking about how stories serve us as the writer and also serve others, like the people who are reading our books. So Sam is here today to have that conversation with me. But before we dive in, I want to give him a chance to kind of say who he is, what he's about, and what he's doing here in the world.
Sure, great. Thank you. Let me start with kind of my lifelong work that I've been doing. Currently, I work as a licensed marriage and family therapist. I'm working in the Henderson, Las Vegas. I keep referring to Los Angeles because that's where I've lived for more than half my life, the Las Vegas area. I currently see individuals, couples, and families, and the majority of the clients that I see have had some type of trauma in their life. So I'm really taken my own trauma in my own life and the process that I've worked through to really use that in my work with the clients that I see. Prior to that, I worked over 20 years in the Los Angeles area, working in the children's mental health system. There, I held probably every position that you could hold in an agency, starting from just being an online clinician, providing the services to the clients, working my way up all the way to executive vice president over the programs. Really enjoyed that work. It was work that I was able to be very creative in creating programs for children. We worked with kids from birth up to the age of 24. But as you can imagine, it was a high stress job. So I eventually left that position and am now back in doing what I really love to do, which is the direct work with the clients.
So Sam, you've kind of seen it all then. I mean, with all of the work that you did with children before and now as, a licensed marriage and family therapist, I mean, trauma must be a part of your everyday in this
Sure,
work.
sure.
And then you've experienced trauma yourself. So we're going to merge these things together here in a second, but you're a forthcoming author, right? Like, if people have been following, people already know a little bit about you, Sam, because we've been talking together in
Right.
similar spaces about your project. But for those people who are tuning in or might tune in a little bit later, why don't you tell us a little bit about your own experience with trauma and how this book kind of relates to that?
Sure. Back in 2015, I started. Well, I've always been a person that's had anxiety and depression, but it's always been something that was manageable, many times with medication, many times without medication. But back in 2015, I started to really get anxiety that was affecting not only my business world or my work life, but it was also affecting my personal life. That anxiety grew. To the point in 2016, I was not able to work any longer. And I had spent probably a year in talk therapy with the therapist and just could not really get to what was the cause of my anxiety and depression. So I decided to use an alternative method, MDMA, which was and still is not legal. It was a drug that was used in the 80s that was really beneficial, but then it became a street drug, and that's when it became illegal. But I decided to go underground and try this technique and was able to remember memories of being sexually abused as a child. And so you can only imagine what that did. At the age of 57, I was um, thrown into this world of chaos of remembering this abuse that had happened to me. So the book basically is covering a lot of my journey through that process of recovering the memories, and then my process of healing and recovering from those memories, and eventually leading into a lawsuit um, against the perpetrator, and then ending with me working on this book.
I don't want to unmute myself because there's jets flying overhead.
Oh,
Um, and so I was like, hold it, wait. Um, so so Sam, one of the things that I find really fascinating about your story, not in positive ways, obviously, is just that, you were 57 at the time that this childhood trauma became known to you. Um, and it was likely there, right, this whole time, probably causing the anxiety and the depression leading up to that. But that it took until 57 for whatever reason, right, for it to kind of finally come forward in your
right.
life and to have you be able to process it. And you know what would you say to people about how trauma lives and exists, in the body, um, even if you're not aware of it? Or what does trauma do to like the lifelong kind of journey of a person, right? Because trauma is
Yeah,
not this one and done thing. It's not like the episode happens and then that's it, right? Like, a bruise is temporary or a broken arm is, temporary, but trauma is lifelong. So
right.
what would you tell people about trauma?
Well, I think the thing that's been most eye-opening for me is as I go back and look at my life, I can see places in my life where I've made decisions or didn't make decisions, made good decisions or made bad decisions that were based basically on holding trauma in my own life and the effect that it had on me. I was fairly young when my trauma happened. I was in the fourth and fifth grade when the majority of the trauma happened. And you can only imagine what happens to somebody that's really developing along the scale of just becoming a person, how that trauma can affect them in the way that they develop into the adults that they become. So, I think many people think that that was an incident that happened so long ago. Why are you still living in it? Why are you still worried about it? Why do you allow it? You need to just let go. When the reality is that trauma is held in your body. And I did a lot of work, a lot of body work in regards to working that trauma out of my body. Um, and then just also the mental development from and the emotional development that is hindered when you've been traumatized.
I'm glad that you brought that point up because I think we often forget, how much neurological development is happening in our children. Um, I mean, all the way to like their 20s,
Right,
right? Like, I mean,
right,
they're not fully functioning people.
right,
And certainly at the fourth grade level, right? Like, there is still so much that is happening. And while there is like an elasticity, I think, of children, an ability to bounce back quickly or to be very resilient, um, I don't think that that means that we should take for granted that when significant emotional, physical, sexual abuse has occurred during these developmental stages, that they should just be able to like basically shake it off and keep
right,
going.
right. Absolutely. Um, if that would have been the case, then I wouldn't be sitting where I'm sitting at today.
Yeah.
Because
Right.
at some point I would have shook that off, and that would have been the end of that whole trauma experience with me, and I would have moved on with life. The reality is I've carried it with me unknowingly for all of those
Mhm.
years, and I still carry it with me. I would say that I have anxiety probably every day at this point, and I think a lot of it has to do with just the process that I'm going through in writing the book, because it opens everything back up again. But it's something that happens and doesn't go away. And
Yeah.
so when we see adults that are struggling with it, I think a lot of times people get frustrated and it's just, oh, just forget about it. It happened a long time ago. Well, the damage is still there, no
Hmm.
matter when it happened.
Well, the other interesting component here too, right? So, like, if we think about this, you were 57 when you discovered the childhood trauma. Well, so if
Right.
we go 57 years backwards in time, we're talking about a generation, of people that didn't know that this was happening or didn't want to look at it, didn't want to talk about it, didn't know how to process it, didn't know how to treat it, right? A lot of
Absolutely.
kids seen as liars, a lot of parents who were ill-equipped, um, a lot of shame around these types of behaviors. I mean, there's still shame now, but I mean, like in far greater ways, I think, because of the fact that culturally and in our communities, we weren't having conversations at home, and a lot of our homes weren't healthy, and a lot of the abuse was happening there. Um, and so it's like, if we think about this, for people your age who have come forward or finally have recognized what's happened to them at, at a young age, um, they were, kids of your time were forced to shake it off and be resilient and to keep going because there was no openness or
Right.
conversation, right? There was a shroud of silence that was draped over all of you. And so when you think about then being the adult and having people being like, well, get over it, it was 50 years ago, how sad and what a disservice to the child self that still exists, that still feels wounded because they never had the chance to be heard or validated or cared for when it was happening. And so now as an adult, right, like that same person still needs all those things.
Oh, absolutely. And I would say that a damaged child you carry with you all of your life. And there are situations that you get into that trigger that. And I realize now that there are different points in my life and there's different situations in my life where I get triggered by the trauma that happened to me. I'm at a different place now that I can handle it much differently and I'm aware of what's going on. But you can imagine all the years that I struggled with not being able to figure out why I was being, and I didn't even realize I was being triggered, why
Right.
stuff kept happening to me and why I had such a reaction to it, which a person that quote unquote normally when developed through childhood would not have experienced it to that extreme.
Yeah. So what were some of the things looking back? What were some of the things that you now recognize were directly linked to the trauma that as a child?
Sure. I think a lot of my work situations,
Mm,
um, getting into a work environment where I had to sit in an office was at times triggering for me because of the way that I was abused and the way that I had to stay in a situation in a classroom. And then somebody came and removed me from that classroom.
yeah.
That just sitting there in that class, in that work environment, especially if I had a boss that was not probably the most, um, what do I want to say, supportive and complimentary, uh, and was on my case a lot, would
Mm,
throw me kind of back into that trigger reaction that I was having and couldn't understand that. Couldn't
yeah.
understand why, being in the positions that was in, there was a reason why I was promoted to those different positions, and yet feeling like a scared child in those situations.
Yeah. So for people who are joining us or catching the replay, Sam's child sexual abuse happened around the fourth grade is when it started, but it was by a priest at a Catholic school that he attended. And so when he's referring to, these jobs where he has to sit still at these desks and he's got these authoritative kind of bosses, and it reminds him of that dynamic of being a child. That's the connection, right? So the nuns or other or clergy people are taking Sam out of class and bringing him to his perpetrator, not realizing that he's being abused at the hands of this priest. So as an adult, then Sam, in these work environments, it was like almost like two things going on, right? Like one was that these authoritative kind of, I don't want to say cold, but maybe cold or callous kind of bosses that were all business and not personal. Um, Kind of reminded you of the priest in a way, subconsciously, even if you weren't recognizing it at the
Right,
time. And
right.
then the other thing though that was happening, right, is you're kind of an overachiever, right? You leaned on being really good at things and trying to do right by people, right? Because you figured like the better you were in school and being a good student or good boy, right, the more likely it might be that you wouldn't be targeted. And that of course didn't end up being the case, but you kind of carried that high achievement right throughout the rest of your adulthood.
Yeah, I think that came from two different areas. That came from my father, who what was a man that had given me messages of that I would never amount to anything. And so I think that was part of the achievement. But the other thing was the priest would tell me that he had to take me out of the classroom and he had to do what he did because I wasn't a good student. And so I worked as hard as I could to be a good student. And thankfully that became easier for me. But what I didn't realize through that process is that that was not the case, that being the good student was not the thing that was going to prevent it from happening. He was going to come whether I got an A or I got an F on a test. But
Yeah.
I carried that over into my adult life and went into work environments where I became, I rose and was promoted because I was always the person that was on top of things and was doing outstanding work. But then I would get these bosses who were authoritarian, as you say, and it was just a reminder of not only my own father, but also the priest.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, we take for granted these like critical childhood experiences and how they change that neuronal um process, right? The way that we connect things, the way that we associate or disassociate, um, that stay with us and can have these long lasting impacts. And I think, it can be something as small as, like that one thing that your dad said, right? But that stayed with you.
Right,
And so it's like if you think about these smaller things that maybe don't feel as traumatic, but were maybe hurtful or whatever, we carry those with us. Well, why wouldn't things that are traumatic that happen in our childhood not be the same by like multiplications of 10 and 100, you know?
right, right,
Um, so I feel like when people kind of poo poo or, lessen, you know, how much trauma there is for people, I feel like they need a wake up call that there is so much trauma. Um, I mean, the reality of child abuse alone is appalling, right?
hmm,
I mean, how frequent it happens, and within the church, a whole other ball game, and also very alarming. I mean, I was just looking this morning. I was looking for something for your book, Sam, and I came across an article that just came out this month, April 5th. 600 victims within a diocese in the Baltimore, Maryland area.
yes,
I believe. I believe it was Baltimore, Maryland.
yes,
Um, 600 between 1940 and 2000 and something. 600.
hmm,
And this is it's so when people are like, oh, we're making a big deal out of it, or it can't possibly be happening as much as we think that it is, or well, certainly now that there's been so much attention on it, these things can't be happening. And I'm
right,
like, wake up, people. Like, this is happening a lot, and it's been happening for decades. And like,
right,
we might be uncovering it now because we're more willing to talk about it. But like, then when you look at these cases and they track all the way back, like, it's insanity.
yeah, yeah.
Um, okay, getting off my soapbox. So you mentioned that so working on the book, right, is has this way of kind of reopening things. And so you're finding that you have to rely on these tools and skills that you've built over this healing journey to kind of like bring the anxiety back down to a manageable level. What are some of the things that you rely on for your tools, like in your healing and recovery? Because it is a journey, right? There's no final destination. So what are you using to self-care and to kind of like self-medicate, if you will, during this process of working on the book?
It's funny because I would say my number one thing is walking. I walk. I get up almost every morning and walk 4 to 6 miles. There was a period of time where I was walking 12 miles in a day. Um, Part of that was that feeling of just being able to get away.
Yeah.
So that walking to me is a way of just knowing that I am free from any of that abuse that's ever happened to me. So I use that. I use breathing techniques. I use hanging with friends. I think even writing the book, I think this writing the book has been, as it's opened up, the trauma for me. It's also been a new or a different healing process that's happened for me because I've got a voice behind it now. So I am writing a book that is telling my story, and I get to tell it in my terms, and I get to tell it in my words. Um, so I think that that is just another layer of healing. You don't heal from trauma overnight. In fact, I don't believe that you ever truly ever heal yourself completely from trauma. You just get more distance from it, and you find ways to really cope.
Yeah.
Um, so I would say that those are my main ways. Walking, and there's a process of EMDR, which is rapid eye movement, which is helping in therapy. And they are starting to realize now that walking and the movement of your hands and legs back and forth, and you scanning your area as you're out walking. So you're looking at people's neighborhood yards and you're looking at street traffic and whatever, that's part of the same healing that happens when you do the EMDR, which is
Oh,
interesting.
interesting. Yeah, that is really interesting. Huh. I've done some EMDR in therapy in the past and always found it a really interesting technique. And so the fact that they're comparing the same kind of like, I wonder if that's why walking is so meditative.
Could be. They're
Because,
finding it has the same effects.
yeah, interesting. So, so you said that the working on the book is kind of like it's finding a voice and having a voice behind it. So you mentioned earlier that you sued the church.
Yes.
Um, Now I know, but nobody else knows how, and from a voice perspective, did you feel like doing that allowed you to be seen and heard? If so, how? If not, how does writing the book compare?
So I didn't really feel like I was seen or heard through the lawsuit. And my lawsuit happened during the pandemic. And so a lot of it was drawn out and it was canceled and it was rescheduled, court dates and stuff like that. But being seen and heard by the Catholic Church, absolutely not. I think they heard that I filed a lawsuit. Um, I don't think that they really seen me as a human being.
Hmm.
Um, so that way, no, I did not really feel like it. And along with that, the voice and the being able to tell my story in my own words in writing the book is allowing me to state to the world what happened to me, name my perpetrator, and get to a point where I have a voice in regards to what happened. I didn't really feel like I had that with the church. I had a deposition that was a 4 hour deposition where they just kept asking me the same questions over and over. Um, so I don't really feel like I got a voice that was heard at the church because I don't really feel like a lot was done, which could have been done in regards to a healing process for me.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like from what I know of your experience, instead of them hearing your story, they were just like they were listening with the purpose of poking holes in it so that they didn't have to pay you or they didn't have to, list him as a credible abuser or like any of those things. So it was like asking you questions, but as an interrogation
Right.
rather than like empathy and acknowledging or honoring that there's been a disjustice, injustice. Um, and what a shitty like what a shitty system, for
Oh,
victims.
part of it is you file a lawsuit, and so you're going to go through that. You're going to go through that process. But the reality is I was working with the Catholic Church, and if I was raised Catholic, and if I believe all of their teachings, where was the empathy? Where was the
Yeah, right.
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I wasn't suing some big box grocery store. who was totally just be protecting themselves. I was suing an entity that should have had some empathy and should have done more already.
Yeah.
Um, and
Yeah.
their organization or their institution to have helped people that have suffered. And the reality is lots of people don't sue the Catholic Church is because of that experience. It's they tear your trauma back open again, and you sit in a
Yeah.
room for 4 hours and they just tear the trauma open again and again and again with no empathy whatsoever. Nothing Christ-like about it.
I know it's a disgusting irony, right?
Yes,
Like, because in addition to thinking that like the church as an entity is going to be caring and compassionate, you would also expect that the people with the highest positions of power within that entity that represent that entity, the priests themselves, would not be of such moral like ill repute
right,
where they would be preying on young people.
right,
And you would think that if the other people around them who are good and pure knew that there was somebody next to them that was preying on young people, that they wouldn't protect them
right,
by just moving them to a different community, which is the thing that always happens,
right,
right? Like that's all, every single news article, you end up uncovering how there were these suspicions or allegations. And so they pluck the priest or whoever out of the parish and plop them down somewhere else until it starts up back over there. And then that's not um that's not protecting your parishioners.
right,
That's not acting in the image of God, certainly, or Jesus, or any of the people in the Bible, really.
right.
um you know it's just so messed up. Like, there are no other words. It is so critically, morally, systemically messed up. um
Well, and you talk
so
about moving the perpetrator. That's why you had 600 kids
exactly, yes.
who were abused because they didn't stop it. They just moved it to a new location.
Yeah. And you know what I would love to see is I would love to see that it's not just the priest who's held responsible. I want to see them all held responsible.
Exactly.
The
Exactly.
person above the priest who found out and then moved them, the person above that person who gave him the green light to move him. Like, and of course I can say him because I mean, it's basically a hierarchy of hymns.
Right.
Um, when it comes to the Catholic entity, an institution, not to say that nuns are not, don't have the same possibility, but in a lot of our most prevalent news stories, I feel like in this last decade, as this kind of systemic abuse has been propped open, um it's like 99.9% of the time it's priests and the people above them that are moving them around and covering shit up.
Right.
Um so so the so this book that we're working on for you, is really a way for you to tell your story. Do you feel like, in addition to the voice, do you feel like, and of course we're not done yet, but do you feel like it's also giving you a new lens or perspective or appreciation of your narrative? Like, do you look at your story now as it's being written and go, oh, you know what, I was way stronger than I realized, or I actually didn't handle that half badly, all things considered. Do you have any kind of new wisdom or insight about your experience now that you're kind of rewriting it?
Oh, absolutely. Because there was a period of time when I was working through my memories of the abuse that I was suicidal. Um, Felt very suicidal. Felt like I didn't know if I was going to be able to make it to the next hour. Um, as I look back on that, I look back on the adult part of me that I went through that. But I think back on as a child. And I think I've told you one time in one of our conversations that I used to walk by schools. And I went by schools because I needed to know how big and how vulnerable and how little a fourth or fifth grader was. Because to me, I couldn't get myself wrapped around how vulnerable I was at that point, and that I was able to basically survive that.
Yeah.
Um, I realized that I'm a survivor, that I was able to be taken from a classroom, sexually raped, brought back to the classroom, went home, and did not tell anybody because of the fear of not being believed. And
Yeah.
also that I was in an environment where this man had access to me 5 days a week,
Mm.
7 to 8 hours a day. So if I told somebody, would he up his ante and do more to me?
Yeah.
So I didn't tell.
Oh, it's such a real, this doesn't even compare to your experience, but where I want to go with this is the very real thought process for children on this idea of either getting into trouble or something happening worse. And it happened right here in my own home, maybe a week ago. Oh, what happened to my camera? I'm
Mhm.
still here.
I think she laughed for a second.
Okay, I'm here. I don't know what just happened. My camera has stopped working. Can you still hear me though, Sam?
I can still hear you.
You can still hear me. The world can still hear me.
Yeah.
Um, uh, but basically, something that my son experienced over the summer that he didn't tell me. He didn't say anything about it, and we were talking about something entirely separate at the dinner table, and then he comes out with this thing that he experienced, and I said, well, honey, I'm so sorry that that happened. You know, how come you didn't say anything? And he said, I was just so worried about getting into trouble.
Mhm.
And I don't think that I've really ever done anything to make him feel like this particular circumstance would result in him being into any trouble. But in his mind, as a 7-year-old, that was his go-to. I'm going to get
Yeah.
into trouble because I know that this thing that happened or whatever wasn't supposed to happen, is not okay, or is a bad choice or inappropriate, or whatever it is. And I think, you know, when you do spend time with children and you can understand more about how they think and process because you're in conversation with them or you're observing them, and then you think, oh my gosh, what if X, Y, or Z happened to them? It's not that hard to understand how terrified, how silenced, how ashamed, um, that they would feel, you know,
Absolutely.
that they wouldn't come forward. Um,
Absolutely.
so, Sam, I'm going to continue to work on my camera here, but we're just going to keep our conversation going. What do you hope that readers take away? So we know that the book is serving you in a way of offering you a voice, a new perspective, of reframing your narrative, getting to name your perpetrator, right? Getting to share about this alternative form of therapy that really helped you in the process of discovery and healing. But what do you hope for the readers to take away from your book?
I hope they read the book and they get angry enough to do something. I think this is something that, I'm going to talk about the Catholic Church at this point because that's what my experience has been. But I think it comes up, it hits the newspapers, it hits the news, and it seems like not a lot of people do anything about it. They talk about how horrible it is, and then they move forward and just kind of go back on with living their lives. And I think that we need more people that take on the institution of the church and move forward with pointing out perpetrators that have happened to them. In my case, no one else has come forward from the school that I um, was sexually raped at, that I know of. That I know of. But I think it's a call for people that have been sexually abused to come forward with it. And I think it's a topic that's even harder for men to go through. Um, Realizing that they're supposed to be macho, and the shame and the guilt that goes with that, and if the perpetrator was male, does that make me gay, all of the stuff that goes along with it. So I'm hoping the book starts the conversations again, starting at home, starting in a bigger and in a bigger arena, and more people start to go out and bring forward the name of the people that have perpetrated them and be able to work on their story and be able to heal from their um, trauma. We have so many people that are walking around in the world today that have had trauma that has been unprocessed, and we see it in medical concerns with people. We see it in mental concerns with people. So I think it's really about people just walking away from this book and saying it's time to do something.
Yeah, I agree. And I hope that's what I hope, that there's just no looking away,
Right.
and that they'll, talk in their families, talk in their communities, talk within their churches. I mean, because quite frankly, every type of organized religion has the possibility for this to exist in, even though
Sure.
the Catholic Church tends to be a heavy hitter. Um, so, I mean, I think that people will find your story inspirational as well as devastating. And I would hope that, if there are people who experienced what you did in the school that you went to, that maybe this is the thing that will get them speaking. Maybe they weren't ready to at the time, or maybe they've been processing their own stuff at their own pace. um, I'm sure you're not alone from within your own school. You're certainly not alone globally. um, but hopefully this book will be a connector between you and them, and you can have your own support system in that way, and kind of together spread the message and be a part of the change that we absolutely need. um, so Sam, I want to thank you for being here with me today. I also want to let people know about your GoFundMe campaign.
Sure.
So, Sam has set up a GoFundMe campaign to help with the production and publishing of the book currently titled Though I Walk, and you now know where the walk part comes from. Though I Walk is also a phrase from a prayer, which is also a double meaning here, but could change. But for right now, the title is called Though I Walk. I'm going to put the GoFundMe link into the comments. We would really appreciate any donations towards the campaign, so that Sam's really amazing, powerful, impactful story can be out there in the world to help others, um, and really be a part of this conversation that we need to have. Sam, do you want to say anything else about the GoFundMe?
No, I think you wrapped it up nicely.
So at this point, folks, I just want to let you know that you can connect with Sam on LinkedIn. He's also on Facebook, but please go and connect with him at least in one of the places, so that you can follow along on his journey and to see how the book is coming, and to see the other things that he's posting on his channels. Or even if you need to reach out from a clinical standpoint to learn more about his services as a mental health professional, that's certainly also available to you. So go find him on social and let him know that you watched this video and that's where you're connecting from. I'm going to be back with Sam again next week. Let me just make sure that that's true.
Next
Next
Friday.
Friday, the 21st, but we'll be going live at noon, and we're going to focus kind of on different parts of our conversation next week. It's like a part two. So this is your first half. If you're looking to connect with me directly on a matter of writing a book, I'd be happy to hear from you. Just jump into the comments of this video or DM me privately in one of the spaces, and I'm happy to respond. So, Sam, thanks so much again for being with me, and I look forward to continuing our conversation next week.
Thanks, Allie. It's been a pleasure.
All right. See you, everyone.
Bye bye.